What's up? Welcome everybody to Tales Tomorrow. I'm Morrow, your storyteller for today, and with me I have some more RPG horror stories. Sorry guys, unfortunately I can't use my arms anymore. I'm feeling so sick and so under the weather, and I just simply can't. Nah, I'm kidding. I'm back in full body. I got my hands, I got my leggies. I am good to go. No, for real though, I am feeling a little bit under the weather. I think I got a cold or something. I'm not fully sure. It's just, you know what? Actually, blame Mary. She knows exactly what she did, so blame Mary. Everybody go in the comments and blame Mary. Mary, how dare you get Morrow sick? He has to go do recordings for Tales Tomorrow and RPG Horror Stories. Speaking of, we got some RPG Horror Stories for today that aren't necessarily from the same Reddit. There's a subreddit the Den of the Drake found that I had to scour and look around called DnDAITA, and I kind of want to cover some AITA stories, so for this video we're going to cover those specifically. But if they're not that good, we'll just go back to the original RPG Horror Stories subreddit. So let's get some RPG Horror Stories, sorry, AITA stories for today. AITA for insisting that everyone played Dwarf in a short D&D mini-campaign and refusing to change the premise for one player. Hey y'all, long-time lurker, first-time poster, but anyway, AITA for insisting that everyone played Dwarf in a short D&D mini-campaign and refusing to change the premise for one player. I'm male 34, run a D&D campaign for a group of friends, including a married couple. She is 29, he is 31. During the Christmas session, her husband works 80 to 90 hour weeks, so she asked if he could run a short mini-series during the break so the group could keep playing without progressing the main campaign without him. I agreed and started planning a 5-session mini-campaign. I pitched a concept of called Oops, all-Dwarves, inspired by the tone of The Hobbit. Not an imitation, but a homage. A focused story about a single people, their culture, and the emotional stakes of defending their homeland. Everyone initially agreed to all-Dwarf's premise, including her, and nobody voiced concerns. Oh my god, can I just say that sounds amazing? I would have played an Oops All Dwarves campaign. That'd be so cool, man. If only somebody out there actually was running a campaign, just want to run something like that, dude, I would have gladly joined it. That sounds like such a fun premise. Dwarves, I feel like, are something of the most iconic creatures in fantasy, any kind of fantasy media, really. Whether it be D&D, Lord of the Rings, or really, I mean, anything. Warcraft, even, for crying out loud. I think dwarves are so cool, and having to have a campaign that explores everything about dwarven culture and be a little stout folk and just like doing your thing, but like, you know, more dwarven stuff. Dude, dwarves are just a vibe, right? Like elves are a vibe, tieflings are a vibe, humans are like a nice mixture of everything, but like dwarves, I can go into like the dwarven stereotype and be like true gruff dwarf and put on like a silly accent and stuff. That sounds so fun to do. That sounds like a blast, especially if everybody's gonna be doing it. This sounds like a heavenly campaign. I would have played that one day. Because I thought we had a full buy-in, I put a lot of time into building a detailed player bracket, clan lore, history, war setting, character prompts, and thematic tools. The other 3 players were excited and immediately built characters that fit the tone perfectly. But after all that work was shared, this player suddenly said she doesn't want to play a dwarf and insisted on playing a gnome instead. She argued that a gnome could logically exist on the ground and fit fine. When I explained that the premise depends on everyone being dwarves, shared heritage, shared trauma, unified stakes, she implied I was taking a one-shot too seriously. She also said that if she couldn't play a gnome, she might not want to play at all. That stung because 1, she originally supported the idea, 2, the objection came only after everything was completed, 3, it felt dismissive of the time and enthusiasm I put into building something special, specifically at her request. I told her kindly but firmly, for this mini-series the premise is everyone plays a dwarf, and I'm not changing that. I'd love for her to join and she can make any style of personality dwarf she wants. If she doesn't want to play a dwarf, she can sit this one out and rejoin when the main campaign resumes. No hard feelings. I also checked in personally to make sure that there wasn't something else going on because I don't want this to create real-life conflict. Now she feels I'm being inflexible and gatekeeping creativity. Meanwhile, the other 3 players are fully committed and excited, already building tone-perfect dwarf characters. So, AITA for refusing to allow a gnome character and insisting that everyone plays a dwarf as originally agreed. There is an update to this story, but before I cover that specific story, I'm gonna just straight up tell you that you are not the a-hole in the slightest. If the entire campaign and the premise was to play all dwarves in an all-dwarf campaign, you are allowed to run that kind of game and that kind of campaign if you really want to. And at the end of the day, if the purpose here is for everybody to be all dwarves for specifically that kind of campaign, then it makes sense for you to only allow specific things. As a DM, you're allowed to run whatever games you want. If you want to run a game that's all lizard folk and you're just exploring the culture of lizard folk or whatever, then you can do that as well. That's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Or maybe you want to restrict specific classes for narrative reasons or story reasons, like maybe clerics and paladins just don't exist in this campaign for some reason, so everybody gotta play something else. That's fine and well too. Would be a bit restrictive for sure, but there's nothing wrong with having specific restrictions and limitations. That's the point and fun of setting up a game specifically. Not every game is going to allow everything specific, and your game, they're just so thematically centered around dwarves, it makes sense to everybody will play dwarves. It would be kind of weird if suddenly out of nowhere you said, hey, it's a dwarf-centered campaign, but you can play anything you want, a tiefling, an elf, a yuan-ti, whatever you want. It would be just because you're afraid of restricting creativity. Sometimes restricting certain things is not intended to restrict creativity, so to speak, but instead it gives specific boundaries and borders about how to work within these parameters towards creativity. Limits aren't always restrictions. Sometimes limiting yourself to a specific style or specific thing allows for you to really test your creativity, to really test it. Like if it's an all-Dwarfs campaign, how do you flavor your dwarf in such a way where you can still have a little bit of your own personality or your own specific creativity put into this dwarf? Maybe the dwarf that was raised on the surface and just recently returning, so you have a little bit of that depth going on. Or maybe they're somehow ingrained in one of the clans within the dwarven culture and such. Or maybe they're a warlock dwarf that kind of been ostracized from society and now they're trying to find ways to fit in or trying to find ways to eke out some sort of a life for them, even though they've been ostracized for dealing with the warlocky related things or something. There's creativity in limitations because it sets specific boundaries and parameters to work with. But also, alternatively, out of all the things you could allow in a campaign, a gnome wouldn't be that bad, to be completely honest. Maybe the specific player wants to play a specific class, I don't know, maybe like a rogue or something, or a ranger or something, and they just really like the features and specific abilities that gnomes get, and they don't want to play somebody that's like an elf, right? It would be a little bit strange and weird if, let's say, for example, the player asked to play as an elf, but they're also playing as somebody who's a stout folk, basically, you know? Gnome is basically a stout folk, especially if you go with a rock gnome. They're a perfect artificer. They're actually excellent artificer. Oh my god, I loved my rock gnome artificer. One of the best, one of the funnest little guys to play ever. Having a gnome in a dwarf-only campaign, I don't think would be such a massive thing, and it's just gonna be like the one person that's an outlier and stuff, right? Everybody else is a dwarf, they share the culture, and you have the one outsider entering into the culture, so they get a perspective of exploring the specific culture as an outsider. That in itself could be a pretty cool storytelling and roleplay and stuff if you want to allow it. I'm not saying you have to, but I'm saying it is a very reasonable option to ask for that sort of thing. You know what's not reasonable though, however, is for the player to specifically be so hard set and would not be able to budge on it. Basically saying, if I can't be a gnome, I ain't playing this campaign no more. Even though they're the ones that asked for the campaign apparently, but let's go ahead and see what the edit is all about. Maybe there's some sort of resolution here. Update. After a good discussion and clearing the air, we have come to an understanding. To clarify, what she really wanted was the following. She has never enjoyed the aesthetic of classical dwarves and didn't like the idea of a bearded, tough, muscular woman, especially because she wanted to be a rogue, and this was our first time playing 2024 rules. She didn't realize that stats are no longer tied to race, but background. She wanted the stats and mechanics of a gnome. I told her she did not actually have to be a gnome to have some of their abilities. She sees herself as a tricky and clever person, not a stoic, tough character, so with some homebrew and some risk-gaining traits, she gets to play a wily, cunning dwarf arcane trickster that fits the setting. Apologies and good vibes were had, and we had an appointment to build her character together so she can do the 2024 rules. We are now good. Thank you all for the support. Well, I'm glad things worked out pretty well. And also, just because you're making a dwarf doesn't mean you gotta make like a tough and muscular dwarf. I get that's the aesthetic of a dwarf and such, but if you just imagine that some dwarves can be soft, some dwarves can be a little bit dainty, as much dainty as it possibly can be. I mean, I don't think you can really like take away the stoutness. It's kind of just like part of them, right? It's like if suddenly you make a tiefling that doesn't have horns or a tail and stuff and doesn't have like a devilish kind of features, a devilish kind of looks potentially, and suddenly it's not even a tiefling, it's just an orange elf. If you take away the horns, they just look like an orange elf, to be honest. But also, I'm glad that you worked out and found some sort of solution together. Either way, yeah, reflavoring is also a really powerful tool, and I definitely recommend using reflavoring in order to make sure that the players can still be happy, while you're also happy yourself as well with this kind of things. But overall, yeah, I'm glad you guys worked it out. That's really awesome of you. Anyway, let's get to the next story for today. AITA for not wanting another player character to be my son and ask him to be younger or pick another backstory. So we're playing campaign, and when we were making characters, we decided to all play one family, trying to get back to the throne that we're rightly owed. Game of Thrones style, but the campaign is nothing like it. We all picked roles and decided I'll be queen. Sai is her name. Two other players were my sons, Theon and Charlie, and everyone else filled in roles of the family. Though all agreed on, by no means was this main syndrome character on anyone's end. Sai and Theon are incredibly close because of being her heir, and it's a huge part of Theon lore that he is firstborn and is struggling with it. The whole family is close and everyone is very included in the story, is just titles. Well, with the ages of all the characters, my character's first son was born, she was 16, which we all agreed was okay and we were all comfortable with. The DM friend wanted to start playing and we were all happy to let him join our game. So they made a silly jester character of another lord who came with us after we killed his lord. During the session, we met the character. They gave some descriptions of their appearance which sounded like Sai late husband. This caught my attention, and out of character asked if she was my husband's illegitimate child. They said no, they were legitimately my child that was lost when we fled. At no point was I asked about this, so I asked how old the character was, and it would have made Sai pregnant at 13, which I wasn't okay with. It would also have totally shifted the line of succession we all were happy with and made Theon no longer Sai's firstborn. I told him that no, he couldn't be my son. He could be illegitimate, but if he had to be younger, he wanted to be my son. He didn't want to play a younger character because it would have shifted his lore back at least 4 years to be younger than Theon. So I said he couldn't be my son. This really upset him, the DM, but I wasn't okay with her being pregnant so young and Theon no longer being heir, but I didn't want to just let it go. DM told me I didn't have the right to decide someone else's backstory, but I think his backstory is also my backstory if I lost my son, which Sai would definitely have been heartbroken about the whole campaign. AITA for not letting him play my son or have to play a younger character. Okay, this is a can of worms, dude. This is already a can of worms and I don't know how to really navigate this specifically. But what I can say, I think what we should probably do is start outline what is actually going on here. You have you and your group of players that initially joining in, you playing as the mother, two people playing as the sons, and I guess somebody else is playing as some other related family members, and you already decided your dynamic that you guys are happy with. In comes DM's friend that wants to play as well. Without checking with anybody about the backstory or if it's okay for them to write something specific or add something to their own backstory that could also relate to your own backstories as well, they decided to write the entire backstory about them being basically an heir and an older heir specifically, and then just basically expect you guys to just go with it as like a yes, they would just totally just go with it completely and no one have to worry about it. What happened to asking other players if that's okay to do, to rewrite somebody else's backstory? Also, why is the DM not supporting this sort of thing about like why aren't you checking with the other players if it's okay to rewrite their backstory or add something specific that they should know for their backstory? Is this one of those like, it's a surprise twist, it's gonna be a surprise and shock in the campaign, everybody gonna be so excited about it? The only person who's gonna be excited is you, because you're writing yourself to be the next heir. Everybody else is gonna be shocked, and obviously they already are set with their backstory. Listen, I feel like this is one of those meta knowledges that you should probably tell the other players they should know about so that they know what to expect for the campaign going forward, and if they can a-okay that sort of thing. If suddenly somebody decided to add the tiefling character and decided to turn him into my long lost twin or sister or brother or whatever, I kind of feel like I would need to know about this sort of thing so I would be able to expect this sort of stuff and be able to know what the hell to do in this kind of situation. Having to write yourself into somebody else's backstory and stuff, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like fan fiction. It sounds like somebody's just adding some sort of fan fiction and expecting everybody to just gobble it up. No, you're not the a-hole in this story whatsoever. I mean, there's an edit and update apparently, so maybe there's a little bit of update, but in this current story right now, I don't think you are the a-hole. If anything, DM's friend is kind of an a-hole, and DM is maybe not necessarily an a-hole, but is definitely not helping things be better or be understood easier by not clarifying that, hey, you should probably check this stuff with the player that you're trying to write yourself into the backstory of to see if they're cool with that sort of thing. Update. I don't know if anyone actually cares. I do, but I did have a word with the DM and the new player. We had an interesting story. So when we were talking, the person playing the jester, Zoro, and the DM were cross with me. I brought out some of the points made of Zoro seemed to get it and say it was unfair to insert themselves into my life and they hadn't done the math on the ages. So Zoro is now a cousin that was left in an orphanage to try to save him. But the DM was really insisting that Zoro was my child and it was important for the lore. At this point, Zoro is over it and just wants to play. I asked my DM why he was so insistent on Zoro being my child, and now that completely ruins all the previous times we played with Theon as the heir, and even if Zoro was my child, Saya would never replace Theon, they're incredibly close. Well, the DM told me that he didn't like the relationship between Theon and Sai, and thought it was weird how close a mother and son were, especially as Theon is a grown man, and after seeing before last session, he wanted to break the relationship off a little bit, and that's why he told Zoro to be my first child, so Theon isn't firstborn, and it would end that storyline. At no point has anyone complained about the relationship between Theon and Sai, and the story arc they have is a big plot pusher which the DM previously appreciated. The scene I didn't think was a big deal, and when asking other members of the party they thought it was a really sweet moment, but the DM is insistent that either Theon and Sai become less close or Charlie needs to be more involved in their relationship. Sai greatly loves Charlie, but Charlie is doing his own thing and doesn't want to suddenly stop that to take a greater role in the story. And even if he did, Charlie wouldn't have been old enough to remember the death of his father and thus wouldn't have been affected by it. The party is saying DM needs to get over it, but the DM seems to keep pressuring me and the guy who's doing Theon into hard ending their storyline, starting new ones because it's icky. What do I do? Sorry if I don't make much sense, we literally just got off on the call and I feel a lot of guilt. Okay, hold on 1 second. What does it mean by icky? Is it just because you're very close and the player is just using that as a wording in order to try to make you feel bad over it? Or are you actually being a little bit weird and creepy together? Because there could be multiple things going on here. I think at this point, listen, maybe just the DM overreacting, but also it could be maybe the DM is seeing what everybody else is, and maybe everybody's like, hey, I'm totally cool for that. Incest, Wincest, go for it, fam. You do your mom. Theon, go ahead and do it. Do it like they do it on Game of Thrones, I guess. I don't know. I feel like this is something you guys need to talk about, whether the interaction between your character Sai and their child Theon is indeed icky or not, because it could be that just the DM is overreacting, or it could be that maybe there's some sort of an issue and a problem, and you guys are actually crossing some boundaries that is making your DM feel uncomfortable. Honestly, I don't think you're the a-hole for not wanting somebody else to just be like shoved into the story for no reason, but also I feel like it's kind of a weird thing for the DM. Listen, if I was a DM and I had players being weird at the table because they're getting a little bit too weird and like incest is wincest kind of thing, right? They're getting a little bit too anime, getting a little too hand-tied together. I'll probably just be like, hey, please knock it off. I'm not comfortable. Instead of trying to shove somebody else into the dynamic just to try to get them to knock it off and, stop this dynamic specifically, because that sounds really weird. Are you including somebody else in when all I have to do is just voice your concerns? What do y'all think? I'm gonna get to the next story for today. AITA for leaving my friend's D&D group over the way they want to run combat. I'm firmly of the opinion that there's no point in playing D&D or any other game really if you're not having fun time and enjoying yourself. I was recently chatting with a friend of a friend, someone I know for a long time but never really got to know well. We discovered that we're both into D&D. He told me that he was in the process of getting a group together on Discord to start a campaign, and he'd love for me to join as well. We added each other in Discord and chatted about mostly D&D for a while before he added me to his fresh new D&D Discord server. Few days pass, I meet the other future players. We start discussing what we want to do for our upcoming campaign. It was a pretty basic third-party pre-written campaign. We were all excited to start playing soon. In total, we have a group of 5 players plus DM. 3 of them had already played with the DM before, and me and the last player were both people we had met IRL. We get to session 0. DM goes over a few basics, no big red flags. Nothing jumped up at me as something I'd want no part of. He said that we'd be using D&D Beyond for character sheets and dice rolling. He also said that he was aiming for a balance between roleplay and combat encounters. Now we could expect combat pretty much almost every session. I'm not super familiar with D&D Beyond as my other online games so far have taken place almost exclusively on Roll20. Me and the other players get to discuss our characters, and I settled on playing a bard. I was quite excited to try it out since it wasn't a class I was familiar with. First session comes, we do character introduction and some roleplay to get us to the campaign hook. At this point, notice that we aren't using any VTTs of any kind. Yeah, I don't know how I missed that either. I guess I was caught up with making and meeting new characters and new players and the excitement of a new campaign. I guess I was assuming that D&D Beyond had an integrated VTT. Does it? I still don't know. that I'd be using that. Technically it does, but you gotta pay the high tier, or like 10 bucks a month, I think, to WotC, which is already in itself a crime in itself. Dude, I'd rather sell my soul than pay money to WotC at the end of the day. I'd rather get possessed by yet another succubus and sent to Succulendia forever. Actually, that sounds more like a win-win situation for me, but I'd rather get possessed and put in another crappy deal with a succubus, with yet another succubus at the end of the day, than pay WotC any money. And that says something. But then the first combat encounter happens, and I realized that we are running everything, including combat, entirely with only theater of the mind and Discord audio. Now, I am really bad at theater of the mind. I have a degree of aphantasia, meaning I physically cannot picture images in my mind. I've always done D&D with some sort of a battle map, at least for combat, because otherwise I just cannot picture where everyone else is standing, how far away they are, or where they are relative to the enemies. I decided to give it a go, because why not? Anytime my turn in combat came, I just completely lost and confused. I had to ask several times, how far from me is player A? How about enemy B? How many people are within a range of X feet of me, and who are they? As I was playing a spellcaster, I felt like I needed to know where everyone was in order to cast spells, especially AoEs. My turn always took so long, and I felt so bad about it. It really stresses me out. Imagine you have Burning Hands as a spell and you suddenly want to use Burning Hands, so you have to ask the DM every single time where everybody else is currently at. Like you said, you have aphasia, so you can't imagine where everybody else is, so you gotta kind of keep track of notes. This sounds like a lot of work. Dude, that would stress me out, especially because I now need to memorize where everybody was specifically and whether they're within a specific proximity of a spell that I'm about to cast, so that I'll accidentally friendly fire them. Why isn't your DM using at least a simplified VTT? There's so many free VTTs you can use just for the sake of making sure that you can just place everybody on a battle map or Roll20, just anything. I mean, if you're paying money to WotC, they have their own VTT that you can actually use. It's very simplified and lame, and I also recommend just getting Foundry or, God forbid, Roll20 at that point, or anything at this point. But just as long as you have some sort of a battle map to use, like, I just don't understand why these guys don't use a VTT for a battle map. Like, Roll20 is literally integrated into the Discord. Roll20, you could just be clicked in and you can have it be pulled up immediately onto the Discord so that everybody can see where they're at, so when they can do their moves specifically, they know that I'm friendly firing allies or enemies in particularity. Like, it's not rocket science. It's not that difficult to do. It can be done, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for a player that has aphasia to request that you guys use a VTT, because otherwise combat is going to be hell for you. After the session ended, DM thanked us all for playing and asked if you all had a good time and if we had any questions going forward. Asked if we were going to continue running everything with only theater of mind. DM said yes, as he feels like VTTs are a waste of time and theater of the mind is the way D&D is intended to be played, that we have to use our imagination. That is the biggest crock of crap ever. Look up any of the books that are like some sort of an adventure. You know what they have? Maps. You know what the old school books had as well? Maps. There were dungeon maps. It's the easiest way to do some sort of a dungeon map or like some sort of a battle map. Hell, in fact, if you really think about it, from the old days of D&D, a lot of them were dungeon crawls, kind of required to have a map and a labyrinth and traps and combat and stuff. The entire point was to have some sort of a map to be visible so that you know exactly where you are. Distances actually matter. Distance for spells matters. Radiuses matters. Cones matter. The measurements are specific because it was intended to use with some sort of a grid map for combat. Outside of combat, run whatever you want, do whatever you want, really doesn't matter. It's a roleplay at the end of the day. But for combat, the least you can do, at least especially accommodate somebody who has aphasia, running some sort of a grid so that everybody be on the same page specifically. Don't even have to run anything complex. You can find a lot of the free ones. I think there's like Owlbear maps or something like that. It's called something like that. Also, the free version of Roll20 that you can use without any of the bells and whistles, just to make sure players know where their characters currently is in relation to everybody else. So when they're casting Fireball, they're not friendly firing everybody continuously. It's really not that difficult of a thing to have done. At the end, the things that VTTs are a waste of time when you're going to be playing through Discord, when Roll20 is literally integrated into the Discord. It's like just in there. It's in there. Just use it, you stupid moron. Sorry I'm being so mean to the DM, but they're really coming off a little bit moronic there. They just come up with stupid lame excuses to do basically nothing and just to be lazy about it. I explained my issue with picturing things in my mind and said I probably wouldn't continue being part of this campaign if we're going to continue without any visual support, as this type of play just is not for me. At this point, a couple of the other players chimed in and said they also wouldn't mind having even simple battle maps for combat encounters, as it would make planning their turns and actions easier if they could see where everyone else was. DM got really mad at me, saying I wasn't willing to try doing things his way, and I was trying to influence his friends to play my way instead. I felt really bad and said I didn't mind just dropping out. They didn't have to change the way they played on my account, but I simply wasn't able to join in. I apologized to everyone and ended up leaving the Discord server. Next time I saw DM IRL, I found out he had been bad-mouthing me to our mutual friends, saying I was really bad at playing D&D and had tried to sabotage his game. On the one hand, I don't think it was on me that I didn't ask about VTTs and the likes in session 0, but on the other hand, it didn't occur to me that we wouldn't use one at all, and I think I was pretty reasonable in trying his theater of the mind only system for a session and leaving when I realized it wasn't for me. I've done theater of the mind, and you know what we had at least? We had a world map and a town map, so we knew exactly where our tokens were in relation to everything. There was at least some sort of a visual representation. Not everything has to be theater of the mind, especially for a player that has a specific condition that doesn't allow them to be proficient in theater of the mind only combat. Dude, this sounds like hell. I'm glad you got out of this game, for real. Also, this GM sucks. He literally just bad-mouthing you because you mentioned that you have aphasia, you can't visualize things, so this would be a really good visual aid for you. God forbid you decide to ask for some sort of a visual aid to make sure you can play D&D better. The only other solution I can think of for you to do, and that would be doing extra excessive amount of work, is to have your own little grid or your own little VTT on the side so you can keep track of where everybody else is for your own self personally. But I mean, at that point, you just ask everybody to just run VTT, just run a virtual tabletop. Even the simplest one would help in combat specifically. I personally think the DM just sucks at technology, and maybe that's why they're afraid to run a VTT, because honestly, running a VTT would be so easy. You don't even get to run anything complex. Like, I run Foundry, and I love Foundry, but also Foundry takes a little bit to get used to and everything, because there's a lot of different modules and settings that you need to set up specifically to make sure the game fits your specific campaign. I mean, you can play things out of the box and stuff. It's not gonna play brilliantly, and there's gonna be a lot of manual work, but sure, you can play it like that if you really want to. I personally like my little setup. I like my little mods and stuff. I think they're amazing and everything, but you don't have to run anything like that. Roll20 is built into Discord. Just use that, you idiot. You absolute ignoramus of a DM. Anyway, I'm just gonna go ahead and end the story here. What do you guys think? Is the DM here an AITA, or who is the a-hole here, basically? Who is the a-hole? Let me know down in the comments below. And with that, that's gonna be all our stories for today. I want to thank you very much for watching, and thanks so much for being here. If you like what I do, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Also, if the RPG Horror Stories ever goes down, or if you want to submit your own personalized horror story, email is down in the description below. I'll see you again in more Tales tomorrow. Bye-bye.